Well, school fees are once again a big discussion point as the education year kicks off this month. South Africa's education landscape ranges from no-fee government schools to highly priced public and private institutions. There are some expensive government day schools with fees up to 70,000 Rand in the case of Pretoria Boys High School, to the costliest private day school, Kersney College, at 200,000 Rand plus for a single matric year. Andrew Thompson is a freelance journalist at tinychart.co.za who compiled the list and joins us now. Andrew, good evening to you and welcome to Full View. There are some interesting, even eye-watering pricing trends in the cost of school education, while fee-paying government schools are significantly lower than their private counterparts. But fees are just really expensive in the country. What did you make of the numbers you were seeing?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've been tracking them for about the last 4 years or so, and it always staggers me how they continue to climb. And I guess there's often no real relief for the parents. So the standouts always are the high private schools, and then contrasting those to the government schools. And I think there's always an interesting story to tell in the high school fees that many people struggle to pay.
Why was it important for you to document the fees in both of these examples, both in the private and public sector?
Yeah, I think it's interesting from a human interest level what some parents in South Africa are able to afford and are willing to pay for their school fees. But I also think it's an interesting social and sort of political aspect that many are pushing hard to get kids into these top priced schools. And the question is often whether it's worth the premium, whether it's worth that extra stretch or not. And I think there's always this sort of push and pull between public and private schooling in South Africa. And when you consider that the most expensive government day school is around 70,000 Rand a year, and as you say, Kersney is charging 240,000 Rand a year, is that premium worth it, or is it exaggerated in order to be more exclusionary? I don't know. It's a complex and I think typically South African story of vast differences between the top and the bottom in terms of pricing.
So as you've just reflected, it always throws up the important questions. Let's start with, do higher fee schools and private schools offer better education standards than no or low fee schools?
That's a very complex question to answer in a glib response, but I think there's no evidence to say that a private school is necessarily better than a government school. And I think the proof is often in the individual school. So I think there have been South African schools that have done superbly well with very limited resources, and even no-fee schools that have very exemplary matric pass rates. So I think it's a very difficult metric to measure. The private schools will, of course, tell you that they offer a better, more holistic education, and I'm not one to deny that. But I think when it comes to a straight education, there are many excellent schools on both sides, and I think often it's about what parents can afford to do, and they just do their best within those limitations.
Yeah, and by the same token, the counterpart to that question are those who can't afford, fancier schools, seemingly fancier schools at a higher price tag, are they doomed to poor education standards and outcomes? As you say in response to the other question, I imagine, it's quite a complex arena to track, and there are so many different dimensions to enable, an adequate and fair answer to that question. But I guess this then is probably relevant to what you've just shared with us, aside from the shock factor, which is, oh my goodness, because I think at the end of your piece you say that the disparities could probably fund a really fancy, luxurious holiday at some exotic location in the world. This is the reality of the world in terms of pricing that we are facing with regard to South Africa and school fees. What did you hope would be the result or the impact of what you've shared and the trend that you've just identified in terms of policies to address access to quality education in our country?
Yeah, so I think the response I always get whenever I put these stories out is that sort of shock and that initial, I suppose there's an initial sort of voyeuristic aspect to it, that people want to see if their old school is there, or if the school they're sending their children to is on the list. And I think that's often a fascinating one. So that's a motivating factor for the charts that I put up on Tiny Chart. But I think the secondary factor is, yes, that it does highlight the haves and the have-nots, and it highlights just how extreme many school fees are. And I suppose it often, and I often see it in the comment section, it ignites this debate, as you've said, as people fiercely defending their own schools or fiercely sort of diminishing other schools. And I think it's a really complex world, and I think there's not. In many ways, I just put it out there for people to look at and explore and discuss and share their own views at. And it's a fascinating South African discussion for my mind. But yeah, the differences are vast. And I think even if you choose to send your kid to St. John's over Kersney, you're saving 34,000 Rand, which is not insignificant. And I think if you're choosing to send your child to Pretoria Boys High over Rustenburg, that's the difference between first and 10th place. You're saving 20,000 Rand. So the differences are significant. And I suppose when parents are struggling to make ends meet, or South Africans are really having to make difficult decisions, sometimes these charts can help people go, in perspective, we're actually doing okay. And we're actually getting through a pretty difficult time by doing the most important thing, which is educating our children.
Well, thanks for that. As you said, it was a culmination of a 4-year gaze on fee pricing throughout the country. So for parents who want to make that choice, as you say, in some cases, the disparity is not insignificant. And this might, empower them to be able to see what schools are in that range, in the upper band, and make those decisions, but also what's available in the public space as well. Still, just something, that is prohibitively out of range of so many families in the country. And one would like to see that, especially on the earlier questions around outcomes, whether, it really does work out, or whether their kids still have a good shot in a government school environment, particularly one that might be free and no fee applicable. Andrew, thank you for the work you've done. And that was tinychart.co.za. You can go and have a look at the list there. That's Andrew Thompson, a freelance journalist there who put together that chart.